You've had a long career in both as a diplomat, and then in 2004 you became an MEP.
Mm-hmm.
But it was only really, to be honest, in relation to the whole Daphne Caruana Galizia case and your kind of traveling to Malta in November 2017, I think it was initially. You led a delegation to check on the rule of law and everything. That I really obviously first heard of you, to be honest. And so I guess I want to start off by asking a little bit about sort of childhood Anna. Where does where did the passion for to defend democracy, the desire to kind of take up politics, did you come from a political family? Where do you think that comes from in your own kind of upbringing? And
Well, don't forget that I was born in Portugal under dictatorship in 1954,
of course,
and a dictatorship that lasted for 48 years. So
yeah,
I lived the first 20 years of my life in dictatorship. And I normally say when I go around the world and see situations where, leaders pretend to be in transition towards democracy and so on, but actually keep just in dictatorship, in authoritarian regimes, when I see a dictatorship, I recognize it because I've lived under it. And definitely this was very formative for me. I think already at the age of, in my teens, 13, 15, I started to be active we had a clandestine movement of high schools for democracy and against the dictatorship and against the colonial war, because at that time the dictatorship in Portugal was also waging a colonial war in countries now independent that were former Portuguese, that were Portuguese colonies then, like Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, and so we wanted to get rid of it. Yeah, I was lucky to be be born in a middle class family, who, although not terribly active politically, because of course you would risk your life if you would be politically active, but were very conscious of the injustice and the nature, the obscurantist nature of the regime. My father was a very cosmopolitan man, a captain of the merchant marine. He traveled the world, and obviously he had a very, very negative view about the dictatorship. So probably I that also helped. And although my family was afraid of my clandestine activities, although at a very incipient age, it became, of course, more serious when I went to university. These were the last years of the dictatorship. I was suspended from university because of my political activities, like with many other students.
wow,
I was able to avoid long-term prison, what happened to many of my colleagues, without trial and so on. And of course, after 74, when we had our revolution, I mean, a coup d'etat with tremendous popular support, um, of course, it became, I was finishing university, it became quite obvious for me that not that I wanted to be part of this process of building democracy. It's not something that you learn in any way, if not by practicing, and it's not something that you are born with. You learn it. It's a process, and the democracy is never finished. It's a permanent challenge, and that's why I joined one of the careers that was forbidden to women during the dictatorship in Portugal. Magistrates was one of them, but also the diplomatic service was forbidden to women. It was
wow,
Mário Soares, as foreign minister in 75, who opened up the diplomatic service to women. So it became very obvious for me that since I always enjoyed languages, and because of my father's interest in the world, to become a diplomat, I passed the concours. I graduated in law, but then passed the concours, the foreign ministry, and started a diplomatic career, which was extremely fulfilling. I felt really enjoyed my work as a diplomat. My last posting as a diplomat was actually ambassador in Jakarta during a very thrilling time to help put an end to this diplomatic dispute with Indonesia over East Timor, Timor-Leste. So it was a process that, exactly because of my anti-colonial stance, I was very keen and was one of the people in the foreign ministry who always, campaigned for the self-determination of Timor-Leste. So it was quite an extraordinary, privileged position to be a relevant actor in that context when we finally took advantage of the fall of Suharto to agree under the auspices of the UN to hold a referendum in Timor-Leste. We'll be this year celebrating 20 years of that referendum. I'm going to be there in Timor-Leste at the invitation of the authorities to celebrate with them that extraordinary day. And of course, that process gave me a lot of visibility in Portugal, because at that time, the foreign minister of a socialist government that was led by Antonio Guterres, by the way, he was the prime minister, who appointed me to Jakarta. He asked me to keep informing our public opinion of the process, because it was something that our public opinion had to follow, had to understand. And that gave me tremendous exposure in the media. And I found out, because of the mail I received, in particular from women and young girls, and girls and young women, that I had become, without wanting it, a role model. And I should use it actually to encourage more women into politics. At that time, also in Jakarta, in these 4 years that I lived in Jakarta until 2003, I realized that something was going very wrong in Portugal with the growth of corruption. I thought it was only the problem in Portugal. I know now it's not a problem just in Portugal. It's in a European problem. It's a global problem. It has to do with the neoliberal policies of the regulation that have financialized the capitalism and the economy, and that is, and I saw that with the importance that football was gaining in the media as a new opium of the people. So that was one reason why I accepted the invitation by the then leader of the Socialist Party, who is now our Speaker of our Parliament, to be active. I had become a member of the party in the meantime, but of course with no action, since I was a diplomat in office. But he asked me to be in the leadership of the party. This was in late 2002. I came in 2003, just about the time when the whole world was anguishing about the preparation of the invasion of Iraq. I think my first job was to actually put the party against the invasion of Iraq, which was for all sorts of reasons. And that was a matter that I had covered a lot, namely in my sense as a diplomat at the UN in New York in the Security Council. So, this is what explains why I moved into politics. And also then in 2004, I was candidated by the party to become a member of the European Parliament. I thought it was in line exactly with my diplomatic experience. I've enjoyed tremendously these 15 years of as a member of the European Parliament. I've learned a lot. Nothing has been more important to make me learn than what happened with the economic crisis, the financial crisis in 2008. And that's exactly when I started paying attention to the matters of tax justice, combating crime, combating corruption. And that's why I ended up in being one of the advocates of the first inquiry committee that the Parliament created in 2014 for the LuxLeaks scandal. And that's exactly what brought me for the first time to Malta in the context of then the second inquiry committee on Panama Papers. That's when I met Daphne Caruana Galizia, when I was stunned to hear the things that she had uncovered. And of course, a couple of months later, when she was assassinated, I was put in charge of the first ad hoc mission on the rule of law to Malta, met with many people, including the Prime Minister, and came back very worried. That worried is reflected in the report that we wrote about that mission. I was one of the writers of that report. Let's say more than 50% of what is there was written by me here in this sofa where I'm sitting now.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, what I've followed in Malta is extremely worrying. Not just for Malta, for the people of Malta, of course,
Yeah, and
but also for all of us in Europe.
Yeah, and if I could interject on that point, because that kind of brings me to another question, I suppose, which is, you did say you, based on your own experience growing up, for the most part, under a kind of a dictatorship in Portugal, that you can now recognize dictatorships elsewhere. I
Yes.
mean, I don't know whether it's your place to, or whether you feel comfortable saying if you see any kind of like similarities or not between the way Malta's operating now and the country you grew up in yourself, or is that too much of a stretch?
I won't call it a dictatorship in Malta because people vote, people have the possibility to vote and to make changes in the leadership. But what I see in Malta is what I see in my own country, Portugal, and other European countries, is indeed the way these neoliberal policies that contaminated everybody, including the socialist parties, developed and allowed the media to be bought by economic interests and genuine economic legitimate interests of countries to be handed to the private sector, and the countries and the states abstaining from regulating, captured by the corrupt and the criminal. And we're not talking about just the criminality, for instance, involved in tax evasion and tax fraud, but actually organized crime, mafia.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, this is more serious in small countries like Malta, and that actually style themselves as hubs for doing just that, for laundering money for the rest of the world and for the EU. And that this has been tolerated by the EU, it's really something that alarms me. And that's exactly why I've been so vocal in the European Parliament, and will continue to be vocal also now that I'm out of the Parliament, because I decided I believe in limitation of mandates, exactly because I believe in the fight against corruption, and I decided not to run again. But I think I still can be very active for Portugal and for Europe and globally,
and
as
you
a
see,
citizen, a committed citizen, exactly denouncing corruption and fighting organized crime.
And you see, that's going to be very comforting for, certainly I received a few kind of suggested questions and comments from people. One of them, for example, was from one of the activists in Malta, the Occupy Justice activists, the people who hold the vigils every month for Daphne Caruana Galizia. Her name is Rachel Williams, and she wondered aloud to me and wanted me to ask you how, because you've been such a brilliant advocate and proponent for change in Malta and justice for Daphne and everything, there was a sense, a lot of us felt a sense of dismay to hear that you weren't going to be continuing to, speak in European Parliament, of course, whilst obviously respecting your reasons for not wanting to. Her question was, so how do you feel you might continue to be able to help kind of popularize, for want of a better word, the issue and push the case forward a little bit?
Yes, I will. I am following. I'll keep following what are the developments in Malta. I'll keep interacting with actors in Malta. I have many friends in Malta. I do. I love Malta. It's a beautiful country, an extraordinary history, and that's exactly why I think the Maltese people don't deserve this system, which is built on corruption, and even their prosperity now is built on corruption and crime. It's, as I said, it's not just about Malta, but it is also about Malta. It's about all of us in Europe. And so, of course, I will be interacting with my colleagues who are staying as members of the European Parliament, old and new, that I know. That I know how the Parliament works. I know how important is the interaction with civil society, Maltese, Portuguese. I am very free. I was always very free. That's one of the great things of being a Portuguese socialist. I'm always very free. It's not at all the kind of system that you have in Malta, where Mr. Muscat tells it how it is, and even from the chief of the police to the attorney general, everybody obeys. No, that's not like that in Portugal. And I'll be using all my freedom to speak up and to interact with people in the European Parliament, in the European Commission, in other institutions, and other institutions outside the EU that are relevant for fighting crime, organized crime, and corruption.
That's
That's exactly
reassuring
what
to
I'm
hear.
doing.
Yeah, that's very
So
reassuring to hear.
I'm not forgetting those who are brilliantly and committedly and persistently fighting for justice in Malta, not just for to bring to trial those responsible for the assassination of Daphne, but also all the other aspects of corruption that we just started to uncover. There are areas where we did not even started to uncover. I mean, I just give you an example. The area of gambling in Malta, but not only in Malta, because of course the connections are worldwide and European-wide. We haven't even started asking questions and digging all the criminal reality behind it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I guess so. To take this to a slightly different direction, then you pointed out, of course, that it is a European issue. And you kind of you account for that primarily in terms of the neoliberal policies that have been so widely adopted across Europe as well. Do you reckon, given that there seems to be a growing wave of Euroscepticism as well, that there's any kind of correlation between neoliberalism, austerity measures, and do you want to elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. I mean, this rise of populism, anti-European, anti-democracy, anti-human rights that we see happening, not just in the US, and which is seen in the election of Trump, but also in Europe. Look at Italy with Salvini. Look at Orban in Hungary. Look at even the speech of even recently in Denmark, you have a social democratic party that won the elections, but using as part of its rhetoric the narrative of the extreme right wing against migrants and refugees.
Yeah,
this is obviously the result of these fear mongering campaigns that was very much fueled by the financial crisis. And as I said, the financial crisis is the result of this attack against the state, the regulatory powers of the state to regulate the markets, to not allow public assets to be privatized for the benefit of a few against the public interest. I mean, you in Malta have not just the case of electoral gas, but you have the case of the public hospitals. The first person who told me about the privatized public hospitals was Daphne Caruana Galizia. And I must tell you, that's what really alarmed me about Malta. If that was happening in a country that was led by a government supposedly to be from the Labour Party, I mean, what is going on? If 3 public hospitals are privatized to a company based in the British Virgin Islands that nobody knows who owns it.
Of course. But so then what does it say to you that so many of these kind of populist right-wing kind of movements seem to be coming from your own left bloc in the European Parliament? I mean, Hungary, Poland, Malta, I'm lost for the others.
I don't think that some of these formations really were left. They call themselves left. Because of the tradition of in the old Soviet days of the socialist Then they styled themselves as democratic socialists. They were not so democratic. They actually became very corrupt and apparatchik organizations, and that's what explains that many of the socialist parties. I mean, I was outraged when I saw, for instance, Mr. Timmerman. After all what we have uncovered about Malta and the case of Daphne and the Kitchembry and Conrad Misi staying in government of Mr. Muscat, despite all that was uncovered about their corrupt ways. Mr. Timmermans going to Malta and doing rallies with Mr. Muscat.
Yeah.
No shame.
Workers' Day rally. Yeah, he went up on the stage.
Don't tell me that this guy is socialist.
No.
Or social democrat, or even Democrat.
So there seems to be, I mean, the European Union seems to be facing some sort of a crisis in some respects. It's trying to, and this is a kind of a two-pronged question. On the one hand, it seems to be trying to redress some of the issues that it's left so unattended to for so long. But on the other hand, it seems to be facing a backlash from the very countries that it's trying to kind of open a discourse with. So, of course, Malta, for example, has had inquiry after, not inquiry is the wrong word, had delegation after delegation come and visit it. We had the Venice Commission. Just recently, we had the somewhat embarrassing performance at the European Parliament with Manuel Malia and Rosiane Kutayar, and a bunch of...
You mean in
the
Council of Europe?
Council of Europe, sorry. And the Azerbaijani delegates as well, who seem to be joining them. There's backlash, and you've been on the receiving end of this in some respect as well, not least of all with, say, Rosiane and on Twitter, the big spats. There's a bit of... How does the European Parliament, European Council, and I know they're separate things, but I mean, how do they develop teeth to tackle this? Sure.
Well, we have to see in all these institutions, European Parliament, European Commission, Council, there are good and bad people.
Right.
We have to identify where the good and work with them and feed them with information and push them to act.
Yeah.
And support them in action. And we have to expose the corrupt.
Of course.
And I intend to do that.
Yeah.
For instance, about those in Malta that worked out the system to protect Muscat in Malta, in the socialist family. Mm-hmm. I intend to expose whatever I find out.
That's once
and
again.
Those that I will find out. And I have some ideas. I have been given some information by some people, and I'm not afraid. I think we can't be afraid. I mean, against the corrupt, exposure is what they fear. Seizure of the assets that were ill-gotten is what they fear. We have to do that. We have to be brave. We have to be inspired by the example of Daphne Caruana Galizia. Of her family, her children, who are doing an amazing job, I think.
They have, and they're an inspiration.
It's not just about justice for the family and for her. It's for Malta. It's for all of us in Europe.
Yeah. So that brings me to, once again, another question is that, I mean, you yourself personally, you participated in a number of European Parliament missions to, well, I've got a list here: Afghanistan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, China, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Are you saying that in all those trips and, on all those missions, there's never been an instance of feeling intimidated or threatened in some way?
This is a question that even here in Portugal, I'm often asked, because I'm also fighting against many of the corrupt and the criminal here in Portugal. And for instance, I'm now putting all my support behind the whistleblower of Football Leagues, Rui Pinto, who is in jail wrongly, in my opinion, while the big criminals are out. And some people, and this, of course, has a connection with exactly the business of football and the corruption that this permeates throughout the society. And some people ask me, aren't you afraid? Of course I'm afraid. I have fear like everybody else. But the question is, we have to control it and we have to overcome it. Are we going to be subjected to the criminals and let our society be run by criminals? What are the values which we want to transmit to our children and grandchildren to believe in? Can we transmit those values if we succumb to the fear and do nothing and just let it happen and let the society be totally overtaken by the corrupt? No. Some of us will fight and will expose them. And yes, I'm not without fear, but I control it. And that's what I've done all my life, and that's what I will be doing now more than ever that I'm 65. And I think it's more than ever my duty to do it, whatever the consequences.
Do you feel a little bit, to some extent, do you feel a bit liberated by the fact that you've not continued your role as an MEP? Do you feel a certain, are you freer to say things that you couldn't say before, or was it always kind of a no holds barred?
Well, I was always very free to say whatever I thought I should say. But sometimes you have to indeed look at the question of the timing, whether people understand you or not, whether what are the tactical implications of being very, very outspoken. And I think I've learned a bit with my own mistakes, by the way, uh, trying to find the right time, the right mode to say it. But I feel, yeah, in a way, I feel freer than ever. I'm a socialist. I'll be a socialist until I die. I'm a true socialist, I believe. I
Mhm.
believe that I fight those who pretend to be socialists but aren't. I'm for justice. I'm from democracy. I don't pretend that I don't make mistakes. I make mistakes. I try to
Of
learn with
course.
my mistakes. But I feel very free. And as a Portuguese these days in my country, with the knowledge that I have from the European Parliament, from global affairs, I can't keep silent. I will be speaking up. I will be partnering with people like myself, are really keen to make to fight corruption, to fight organized crime, and and for accountability and justice.
It's interesting that you should mention that you should say, I'm a true socialist, because I actually read an article not too long ago now, and it was basically about Stephen Fry, who was at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas in November 2018, and he basically seemed to indicate that the true left, has either lost its way or become irrelevant in this day's debate. So, to quote him, he says, "A Grand Canyon has opened up in our world. On one side is the new right promoting a bizarre mixture of Christianity and libertarianism. On the other, the illiberal liberals, obsessed with identity politics and complaining about things like cultural appropriation. These tiny factions war above, while the rest of us watch aghast from the chasm below."
Well, I don't fit in any of these categories, definitely. I'm someone who believes in democracy, in
Hmm.
justice, in fairness, who believes in a market economy, but under the regulation of state,
Right.
and who believes in the rule of law, and not just the rule of law at the national level, but at the international level. And
Hmm.
that means, of course, um, multi, a
Kind of overarching,
rules-based
like,
world.
yeah.
Exactly. I believe in the role of international law, the role of international institutions to regulate.
In fact, you've spoken
States are
about,
still very relevant, but they are not the only institutions that are relevant for regulation. I believe in the citizens being able to make a difference by exposing
yeah.
facts, by interacting as citizens with parliaments, but also as with civil society organizations. So
In fact,
um,
you've spoken about you're a supporter of a federal Europe.
exactly,
What
I
would
am a federalist.
what would
And I
that look
am
like a
a
bit?
federalist in the line of those who created the European Union, first of all, to fight war, to prevent war, to design a system, a rules based system. And crucial rules are those for democracy and rule of law and respect for human rights. And and I believe in political integration of the EU because in the globalized world we live in, of course, we have to share sovereignty. There are things, for instance, fighting organized crime, be it in taxation, be it in justice in general for security reasons. We absolutely cannot do it at the state level only. These are phenomena that know no borders. We absolutely need the European dimension to make a difference for our citizens in regulating these matters, but actually to make a difference in the world, to go regulate at the global level the economy, or the digital era we live in. We absolutely need the European dimension. That's why I'm a federalist, being a socialist, and socialists and social democrats and Christian Democrats were at the heart of the creation of the EU. We have to bring the EU back into the kind of force for regulation, good, positive, democratic, fair regulation that it was meant to be, and which was thwarted the minute all these neoliberal theories about getting rid of governments and getting rid of public sector were spread out. We need to fight them. And I'll partner with whoever, even people who say they are on the right. But if they fight for these objectives of bringing regulation, fairness, democracy, respect for human rights, I'm with them. On the right or on the left, never, of course, with those who deny those basic values.